Podsmashers of the internet, and welcome to another episode of
Bit Podsmash,
where gaming goes to grab a beer. Do you have like an instrument with you? That tink 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 tink.
I have my ring on a glass.
Oh yeah, I should do that too.
Yeah, there you go.
That's funny. All right, we are your hosts, Penguin and Termite.
Yeah, I'm Penguin.
I am Termite, and we are a weekly video game podcast smashing together ideas that you care about with video games.
That's right, and this week, we don't need no education.
That's a good pull. Is that Alice Cooper? No, it's Pink Floyd.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
I
was
know
thinking of School's Out
song,
for the Summer.
Obviously, like the back of my hand, but I don't.
Yeah,
I don't. I'm like, oh yeah, it's one of those artists from the 70s, right? Yes, we are talking today about educational games. So the contrast of the song I just sang. So yeah, talking about games as educational tools, and specifically games that are designed to be educational tools. So that is what we're talking about. Everybody knows have encountered them at some point, I imagine. Everybody's.
If I have, and you have,
yeah,
back when gaming was not a part of pop culture as it is today, then surely we have all experienced it, and we're going to talk about how and where and why.
Mm-hmm, exactly. So yeah, it's a huge industry in its own right. It's not going to pop up on E3. It's not going to be news that people talk about regularly, but it makes money, and it's a kind of a big deal. So that's a big part of the industry, and we haven't even touched on it yet. So we are going to talk about it. Woo! It'll be fun. It'll be different. It was a lot. I did a lot of research for this that I just hadn't been something that I had really thought about before.
Mm-hmm.
So cool.
They're everywhere.
Yeah.
Since we are where gaming goes to grab a beer, and we are drinking beers, what are we drinking?
I'll start.
Do you want to go first? Yeah.
I finally have ended my Corona streak, ironically.
Yay!
For me now. Ironically, for me now, it is, for us recording today, it is May the 4th, so it's May the 4th be with you today. And tomorrow's Cinco de Mayo, so I ran out of Corona right before Cinco de Mayo. It's kind of funny. Anyways, so I did grab a new beer for the podcast this week, and it's one that's had my eye for a while, but I never grabbed it until now. And it is from Wicked Weed. It is let me read the thing. It is a watermelon dragon fruit burst session sour. So it's a watermelon dragon fruit sour. It looks...
That sounds yummy.
I don't think you'd like it, and I'll tell you why. It looks and tastes, as my wife said, like a Jolly Rancher.
That sounds awesome.
Oh, really?
I like that.
I thought you didn't really have a big sweet tooth. It is very sweet, and it's not quite as sweet as a Jolly Rancher. That's a little exaggerated, but for it's like the beer version of Jolly Rancher.
Right.
I don't actually get much of the watermelon, because watermelon ultimately, though a sweet flavor, is a kind of tame flavor compared to the dragon fruit that's in there. Ooh. And it's interesting because it's a sour, but dragon fruit is almost a bittersweet kind of flavor. So there's it's both bitter and sour, and it's like a juicy wave is the way I described it. It's like kind of comes, it's like, oh, this is really sweet. Oh, it's kind of bitter. Now it's sour. Now it's sweet. Now it's sour. Now it's bitter. Like, that's just like from one sip. But
nice.
Dragon fruit's a very distinct flavor. I first encountered dragon fruit back in the early 2000s when Sobe, the drink. You remember Sobe?
Oh yeah, I know about Sobe. Yep.
Yeah, like I don't even know how to describe, like a sports drink. I don't even know. But they had a dragon fruit Sobe flavor, and I remember, of course, being a young teenager, maybe even like a upper elementary school kid, I was like, I like dragons and I like fruit. That's got to be the best flavor ever. I remember tasting it and it being wildly different from what I expected, and I didn't like it. I was like, this is gross. Ugh. Now with a more refined adult palate, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, it's like a bittersweet, sour, strange. It's good. It's interesting. I didn't like it with my first sip, but now that I've had a few more sips, I'm appreciating the Wicked Weed watermelon dragon fruit burst.
That's cool. You have made me think of two beers. One of them is 21st Amendment's watermelon beer that I can't remember the name of at the
Hell or
moment.
High Watermelon, is that the one?
Thank you. Yes,
Yep.
That one's awesome. And that's got I think that has the watermelon taste you're trying to describe. It's like not overwhelmingly sweet. It just has that like undertone of watermelon.
Yeah.
And then there's also another beer by Dogfish Head called Dragons and Yum Yums that has dragon fruit in it.
Mm-hmm.
It's very, very prominent. So yeah, I'm excited about this beer that you're trying.
Yeah,
I need it.
I have 5 more cans, so you can come and we can do a beer swap, and you can wear a mask, and I can put the beer out, and then you can put the beer in its place, and then I'll open the door and pick up the beer.
Ooh, that just reminded me of a really good question I wanted to ask you. That could be a big tangent for the show. What are your convictions within your allowed behaviors regarding coronavirus and going back out into the world?
Why don't we talk about that after you talk about your beer? Why don't you share which beer you're drinking, and then we'll talk about that.
Okay. I'm having 6 Bears and a Goat. They're grapefruit IPA. And it is amazing because I hate grapefruit. I can't.
Interesting. I love grapefruit.
Like the Snapple color or like flavored grapefruit is disgusting. I can't eat it straight. It has this weird, like hyper metallic like taste to it. The actual fruit, right? This beer does not have any of that. It has the good quality of grapefruit that I like, and that's like the sweet citrusy notes with an IPA. So of course there's hops and it's bitter, but it's not too bitter at all. Actually, it's very smooth and mellow and very well balanced. This is a delicious beer, and it's pink. Like
I didn't know you didn't like grapefruit. I love grapefruit. I didn't always. It's very sour. It is like it's like the warhead of fruits, where you're just like you take a bite and you're just like, oh gosh. But so I used to hate it. But with my refined adult palate. This is the second time I've said that in this podcast, and it sounds so pretentious, and I fully admit that. But I have developed a taste for grapefruit over the years. It's not my favorite, but if there's like nothing else to eat, and I'm just craving fruit, and my wife has those little packets of grapefruit sometimes in the little cups.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll crack one of those open and eat it. So.
This little bit of a story that goes with this beer that I picked up is whenever we need beer, we're trying to support local breweries, and we're a stone's throw away from Fredericksburg. So we're trying to go down to the breweries and take advantage of their curbside pickups. And so I've done the Spencer Devin Dealer's Choice Packs in the past, which I've talked about on the show. So I've had a lot of Spencer Devin. And then I went to Red Dragon, and they're doing the big, like, crowd, the 32-ounce cans. So I can't really, like, unless I split it with my wife before we start the show, it's a little more difficult, and they're more expensive. So we have gotten a few of those for us to share, but I haven't had them on the show. And then this most recent trip, I went to 6 Bears and a Goat. I ordered online. I pulled up, called the number. They brought it all out to me. And we got 4 different types of beer. So we had 16 pints. And, beers with this curbside pickup are anywhere from Spencer Devin's low end of $2 a pint to 6 Bears and a Goat is $4 a pint. And like these beers cost $6.50 to $10 at the brewery itself. So I really and I'm helping the brewery by like going and buying. So I don't know. I feel good about it. Sometimes it's a little expensive, but that's why I've been having a lot of local brewery beer, trying to, do what I can.
Okay. We are 8 minutes into the show, and we just got done talking about beer. So my question for you is, do you want to talk about the news things you have, or do you want to talk about your question about the coronavirus? We can do both.
All of the things.
We can do both, but we have to be concise with our discussion then.
All right. I really want to know the difference in convictions here, because I've butted up against my own family, not my nuclear family, but my external family-ish, mom and dad, about their convictions about this stuff. And they're on the side. Apparently there's this dichotomy of there are folks who want to, I guess. It's all like, it's crazy. And we'll get
become politicized. It's a pain, but yes.
I guess, and it's shocking to me how politicized it is as someone who like follows the news, and I have political opinions, and like I'm in that world. So I'm not completely oblivious to the politics of what we live in, but people are now so extreme. Like, we want to get together. We're coming over. We're bringing food. We're having a cookout. And I'm like, no. And then these folks are telling me, and this isn't just my parents, I've talked to other people too, we're not ever going to wear a mask in public. That's ridiculous. This is crazy. It's overhyped. We need to get back to work. And they're just like doing everything they want. And then my wife and I, we have our own masks. My wife made one. We don't go out at all. We order everything online. And when we do go to places, we do everything we can to avoid interacting with people. So I feel like I'm on the other side of the fence, and I'm being accused of taking it too seriously. So I was wondering where you were as I'm having these different conversations with folks.
Right. Without sounding too political, what frustrates me is that it has become political, because the reality is that like there is a happy medium, and that it's what we need to be working towards together. It's very important that in a situation like this, people like actually cooperate with one another. And so the fact that it's become politicized means now it's like if you try to have a reasonable approach, a reasonable middle ground, then somebody's going to accuse you of being a terrible person. You know, which is exactly what you're describing, is you're going to be accused of taking it too seriously and hurting the economy if you decide you want to stay at home and be safe. On the other hand, though, you've got the people who are saying if you even mention that you have concerns about the economy, well, isn't it more important that people stay alive than the economy? It's like both are important. The Great Depression was a terrible time, and people died due to massive poverty, and we are spiraling towards a depression. So, you know, there's a middle ground, and I wish that more people had a moderate, independent approach. I think most people actually honestly do, but the voices you hear are the people who are loudest. The small minority of people who are the loudest are the voices you hear, unfortunately. Anyways, that's my take on it.
I mean, what do you do?
No, I know. In regards to my personal approach and what I believe strongly in listening to the recommendations of the CDC and the World Health Organization over government officials. Because the CDC and the World Health Organization are the people who actually study this stuff and have degrees and, you know, in epidemiology, not just politics, not just political theory, or law or whatever. It's like governors, you know, for the most part, governors are doing the right thing, but like they are lawyers at the end of the day. Their education is in law, not in epidemiology. So therefore my strong belief is listen to what the guidelines say. As of right now, the guidelines say gatherings of 10 or fewer, or like fewer than 10 people are probably okay, as long as you don't feel symptoms. And if both people are wearing masks, there's some statistic that shows that like if two people are wearing masks, even if one of them's infected, the transmission rate is something like 1.5%. So if you,
oh wow,
yeah, it's so
nice.
So yeah, it's really important to wear masks, even if they're not like the top rated, like filter out everything masks. The fact that like this thing spreads through droplets of mucus. So if you have a mask and it's catching most of the droplets, it's got a very low transmission rate. So for example, I can use a very tangible example of what I would find to be acceptable versus not acceptable. It would not be acceptable to throw a barbecue with all of our friends and get together, and everyone's going to the grocery store to get stuff, and then everyone's coming and bringing God knows what into your home. Let's just say your house. It would not be acceptable to throw a big smash party right now for the same reasons. What I would find acceptable is a couple of friends coming over. Everyone is, you know, required, quote unquote, everyone agrees to wear masks, and we sit on the porch and hang out and talk and drink beer, you know, obviously taking the mask down just to put the beer in and then put the mask back up, you know what I mean? Like, I would think that would be fine, and I don't find that too unreasonable in regards to, like, you know, I think any one of my friends would be happy to agree to those terms, even if they personally are like, I don't find masks to be all that important. I think that my friends are reasonable enough to be like, but Dan, it's important to Dan, so it's important to me, you know? So, yeah. That makes sense? Huh. I think that's where I stand.
Yep. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Yeah, it's great. Yeah, I guess I have the same view. I literally think the same thing, and I'm being told to not trust the science, that they don't know what's going on. There's no evidence of a pandemic in our area. The hospitals are not overwhelmed, and that I am taking it all too seriously. Yeah. I was like, okay.
My dad
dad
accused me of drinking the Kool-Aid. And I'm like,
yeah,
I can say the same thing you're saying. You were saying I'm drinking the Kool-Aid based on nothing but your predisposed biases. I can say you're drinking the Kool-Aid because of your predisposed biases. You know what I mean? Like, there's no, I was so mad when he said that. I'm like, don't you accuse me of just like, because what that statement implies is that I'm not thinking independently. I'm just thinking what someone else tells me. And I'm like, no, I am trying to be as independent a thinker as I can and take in all perspectives. But but you're accusing me because of decision, you know, because of my personal like beliefs on it. You're accusing me of drinking the Kool-Aid. GTFO, you're not seeing your grandson ever again.
Wow. Okay.
I'm vindictive. I'm a vindictive man.
Okay.
I'm kidding. No, I'm joking. I actually wasn't even that upset, but I did call him out.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, I've had a heated conversation with my parents about this exact same thing. And of course, when you're talking to coworkers, it's way more professional. And so I just kind of know where they stand based on what they're saying. So I have not engaged any coworkers in it. But yeah, I know. So it's interesting. It's crazy. And the reason why I wanted to ask on the show is because it's kind of, this is unprecedented time. It's historical. This is nuts. It's crazy. And we'll probably never see this again in our lifetime. And it'll be cool when we go through our shows and we're like, oh, hey, remember that crazy time when there was a coronavirus and we were all, and our grandkids from us can go back to this episode and be like, hey, listen to our grandpa talk about the coronavirus back in their day and their time. And
right. Depending on how this goes. The funny thing is I listened to a podcast today and they said this idea that I hadn't even really considered. They were like, depending on how this goes, this is either going to sound like overblown paranoia or like hindsight 2020. We did not take this seriously enough. Like almost, it's either going to sound overblown or it's going to sound flippant. And that's kind of the again, because either this is going to be a disaster and our like talk of like, yeah, I think it'd be okay if like a couple people got together and drank beers on the porch. Like that's going to sound tone deaf like crazy if this goes really bad. Or on the other end, we're going to be like, oh my gosh, we're taking all these precautions and it's such a big deal and it's so serious. And like, who knows, maybe like, we get a vaccine gets developed in the next like couple months, and by December it's just a background thing. It's like the flu. Everyone just gets their coronavirus shot every month, or not every month, every year, and it's fine. You know what I mean? Like, so then in which case this all sounds like we are making a big deal. But at this point in time, like you said, at this moment in history, it is a big deal because it has changed and altered our lives in a way that nothing I can think of. Not even 9/11. I mean, 9/11 was a big deal, but 9/11 did not drastically alter my daily life in such a short span, I guess, because obviously the post 9/11 world, things are different and crazy, and so it did change. It did change the world, but in such a short time span and in such a noticeable, dramatic way, like no, nothing in my lifetime has been this impactful.
Yeah, yep. But yeah, I mean, for the most part, 9/11 happened, and I went back to school, and my parents went back to work, and we moved on. Like the next week, maybe we had a day off. There was like I don't even remember, but I think there was a National Day of Grieving or Prayer or something where they like shut everything down for a day, and then it was back to normal, like quote unquote, like everyone's working, everything's fine. This is way different. Yeah. But anyway, we talked way too much about this. I'm done with that. If you are, I don't want to cut you off for any last nuggets on that.
Let's move on to let's hit the highlights of this news discussion and then move on. We can do it in 2 minutes. You got 2 minutes.
All right. So Jeff Keighley came out and had Twitter, a whole bunch of stuff, and on Reddit, an AMA, Ask Me Anything, about a new thing he's announcing in lieu of E3 and all of the Gamescom, opening night live stuff. I mean, he did that in the past, but all of this show, all of the expos, the shows have all been canceled and moved on because of COVID-19. But Jeff Keighley has come out and started his own organization sort of deal, like his own conglomerate called the Summer Game Fest. And I'm going to read from GameIndustry.biz. Rebecca Valentine's article. It was posted on May 1st. Back in February, when Jeff Keighley announced he would be bowing out of his annual role hosting E3's Coliseum event, he was fairly certain he was in for a long break. And even when E3 was canceled in March due to COVID-19, he still figured he'd be taking several months off before taking the stage again for Gamescom. But then people started approaching him, asking if he was doing anything. And as Keighley does, he began talking to publishers, and to platforms, and to fans. At first, he says, everyone seemed to think there would essentially be a digital version of E3, but when it became clear that that was no longer the case, everyone Keighley spoke to still wanted some kind of unifying concept for their summer announcements and events. So that's happening. It's called the Summer Game Fest. Keighley's Summer Game Fest. It's a 4-month-long global festival
of course, he stuck
everything.
His name on it.
Well, I actually don't even know. I'm just reading this article is what it's.
Oh, okay.
The result is Keighley's Summer Game Fest. Actually, because Jeff Keighley's not a person that likes to attract. He's not flamboyant. I don't know what you call that.
He's not an egomaniac.
Right. Yeah. So he would not put his name on something like that. I'd actually be surprised if he did. Anyway, Summer Game Fest is a thing. It's a 4-month-long global festival of everything games running from May through August, sponsored by partnerships with over a dozen major publishers and platformers.
It's digital, and right? It's all digital.
Yep,
it's not a gather.
Digital.
Okay, cool.
Yep. And he describes it as a Google Calendar for industry digital showcases, game trailers, launches, in-game events, and free digital demos. So it's not just go to Twitch or YouTube and watch a thing. I mean, it is, but there's more to it. actual in-game events. So stuff like Fortnite will probably have some in thing. Like maybe Division 2 does some event with some cosmetics for Summer Game Fest, like t-shirts and swag. Free digital demos on PSN, Xbox Live, Switch, as well as games being launched like during this situation. Like they're actually going to do it. It's pretty exciting. I'm like, this is awesome.
Yeah,
and it's
cool.
4 months long. And some of the companies on here, and I'll close with this, are 2K, Activision, Bandai Namco, Bethesda, Blizzard, Bungie, CD Projekt Red, Digital Extremes, EA, Microsoft, Sony, Square Enix, Private Division, Riot Games, Steam, and Warner Brothers are all confirmed participants.
Cool.
More are expected to join in the coming weeks. Nintendo is a notable omission.
No show. Yeah, I was going to say, and did not they just announce, too, that there would be no Nintendo Direct planned for
June? That's a great segue into my second news point.
As I'm reading it in the news.
Yep. Yeah. And this is an article from VentureBeat, written by Jeff Grubb. Nintendo is telling partner developers it's not going to hold one of its Nintendo Direct video events in June. The publisher had a Direct in June to correspond with E3 every year since 2013. So that's 7 years, or 6. And before that, it held annual stage presentations. But complications brought about from Japan's work-from-home order as part of its attempts to mitigate COVID-19 are forcing Nintendo to push back its schedule. It was putting together a June event. The company was lining up partners and was planning to unveil its first-party schedule for the rest of 2020, that including highlights of the Mario franchise's 35th anniversary, which it's going to celebrate with the release of some classic 3D Mario games on Switch, according to various reports, which we've talked about on this show. But now, the company is far less certain. If it holds another Direct, it may not come until the very end of summer, and that's about it. No comment from Nintendo.
Boo.
And the article goes on to talk some more about some things. So, I mean, we could actually have a conversation about all of that tonight, but those are two big news bits regarding the whole summer. So I am pumped about Jeff Keighley's Summer Game Fest. And it's so crazy how that just came out organically from him, like just talking and reaching out to publishers and stuff in lieu of his E3, because he backed out of E3 himself before coronavirus even like became a thing.
We don't have time to break this down. So that is crazy. It's interesting, but we've got to move on. So
I'm excited.
We can talk more about it next week if we have time. So,
okay.
Cool. Well, having to cut our news short because we spent too much time talking about the coronavirus is not our favorite thing, but
doing this podcast is a favorite thing. Doing this podcast is a favorite thing.
Favorite Things is a segment of our show where we just update you on whatever favorite thing we discovered this week or rediscovered this week or have been loving consistently this week. And in hopes that you might find your next favorite thing. My favorite thing is I have been replaying through, because I'm on an RPG kick after Final Fantasy VII, I've been playing through South Park Stick of Truth and South Park Fractured But Whole. And so Stick of Truth right now I'm going to say is my favorite thing. I got the platinum on it. I already finished it. It was like an 8-hour platinum. It's not a very long game.
Wow, that's fast.
It's not a very long game. So like you think about it in your head as this long RPG. It's really not. Like you could play the entire game in like 2 play sessions if you had like 3-hour play sessions each time. You know, it's not a very long game.
Wow. Yeah.
The platinum itself is not like easy to get because you have to follow these very specific things and there's a lot of missable trophies. So it's not a particularly well designed platinum, although granted it was designed back in like 2013 or whatever. Maybe not even 2013 or 2014. Anyways, but some of the trophies themselves are hilarious. And because this is a family-friendly podcast, I cannot go into details, but just some of the trophies are just, like, the names of the trophies are hilarious. The conditions of having to, like, do the trophies are funny. So it ends up being a really enjoyable experience. Again, if you are following a very particular guide that tells you exactly what to do and exactly what you can miss and when and in what order to get the missables, like, as long as you're doing that, it's a very enjoyable platinum to pursue. But yeah, so that's my favorite thing, is the platinum trophy for Stick of Truth.
Sweet. And you would think that my favorite thing would be my platinum trophy in Final Fantasy VII Remake. But I'm still very bitter about the difficulty of all of that and how unnecessarily hard it was.
You're a little salt there right now?
Very. But I'm excited that I have it and that it's done and I'm over it all. And my actual favorite thing is another Animal Crossing related thing, which apparently I talked about twice in a row and I'd forgotten.
This will be the third time, yes.
So this will be the third time that Animal Crossing has crossed my favorite things, but it's a very specific nuance to it. Gary Whitta is a writer and a producer. He's a writer. He wrote the Book of Eli and he wrote Rogue One. He's most famous for that. Star Wars Rogue One, he was one of the writers for that movie. Has a Twitch stream, twitch.tv/Gary Whitta. He started this thing with the coronavirus and the quarantine and stay at home with the release of Animal Crossing. He's also guest starred on lots of Kinda Funny content. Every Wednesday over at Kinda Funny, a podcast I listen to every day. Well, I don't follow them every day, but they have a podcast every day. Anyway, that's how I came to know who he was, and his gaming knowledge and opinions are appealing, and he started his own Twitch channel stream of Animal Crossing mornings with Gary Whitta. So every morning at 9 a.m. Pacific time, which is actually noon for me, my lunch break, coupled with I'm working from home every day, Twitch is blocked at work, so I can never see it. I can now watch Twitch. So I have a third computer. It's my personal computer. I'm on it right now. And I have him up on there laughing at all of his comments and playing Animal Crossing while I work. He started a late night talk show inside of Animal Crossing. He built a studio in the game, in his basement of his house, in the game. He collected all the furniture. He asked the community for all this help. He's got a desk. It looks like a Jimmy Fallon, or I don't even know all the other late night hosts. I just watched Jimmy Fallon. So it looks just like that. He's had musical guests come on. It is hilarious. It is awesome. And that's my favorite thing. I've thoroughly enjoyed consuming content from Gary Whitta. He is a UK native person, so his accent and the way he embellishes his stories, you can tell he's a writer. Hilarious. So that's been my favorite thing.
Jay Leno, Conan O'Brien, Stephen Colbert, James Corden. Those are just some of the ones off the top of my head.
Jay Leno was replaced by Jimmy Fallon, but I should have known Conan O'Brien.
I see. Yeah. Conan's actually a huge gamer, huge nerd.
Yeah, he is.
He has a whole segment where he plays games. And Stephen Colbert is a Tolkien, a crazy Tolkien nerd, knows the Silmarillion, on the back of his hand.
Wow. Isn't John Oliver a late night show host too?
John Oliver, yep.
That's HBO though, right?
That's a good pull. I think so.
Yeah.
What's his name? The guy who replaced Oliver? Jon Stewart.
Oh, I have no idea.
Trevor Noah. Is that late night? I don't know if that's late night or not. Anyways, that's cool. No, that's interesting. That would be fun to at least watch an episode of and see how it goes.
Oh, it's been great. He's had 6 shows now, and it's hilarious. They mess up. He's trying to do this thing over Discord. It's all from home. Everyone's chiming in digitally. There's avatars that jump in. Nintendo's online solution for Animal Crossing is garbage, and it crashes, and people disconnect. And you see this long cutscene of an airplane leaving mid-show. It's been hilarious to see it all go on, and it still function. So that's all part of the love and the cool and the charm and everything else about it. So, yep.
Well, that's favorite things, which moves us to our next segment, which is going to be lightning fast.
DLC.
DLC stands for downloadable content. It is a conversation you normally wouldn't have around video games, and sometimes it has to do with our main topic, sometimes it doesn't. Tonight's does. It's going to be lightning fast, and because we're talking about games education, I wanted to know what is a fact or anything. What is something that you have learned from a video game that has been applicable to real life? You seem to have one right off the top of your head.
I have to Google it though.
Okay, that's fine. I'll talk about mine.
A specific art thing.
Okay, I'll talk about mine while you Google it. Then I will say that I have learned a very large amount of vocabulary from World of Warcraft and just Warcraft in general. Video games in general, period, but specifically RPGs have this tendency to come up with interesting names. They have to come up with different names for abilities, because you can't just call every ability fire. Every fire ability you can't call it fireball or firewall or fire shield or fire blast. They have to eventually start coming up with different names for fire attacks. And so I learned a lot of this. They pull out a thesaurus, it seems like, and just look up the word fire and start going down the list of words. But being a kid playing games, you encounter these words, and then you just have to put them to the context, and then you learn something. So I learned the word immolate from Warcraft 3 to set things on fire, basically, because there's an ability called immolation. And I learned innervate from World of Warcraft, which actually the word itself means to form nerves. I actually looked that up today, but the idea of regenerating something involving energy, that's, innervate can be used apart from the idea of giving replenishing nerves to a part of the body. You can use it just to mean to give energy to something. And that was from a final talent in the restoration tree of druids, which you could cast it on someone and their mana would regenerate really rapidly. So I learned the word innervate from World of Warcraft. So thank you for giving me SAT words, Warcraft and Warcraft 3.
That's awesome. I can't find exactly what I'm thinking of in my head, but we rented Mario's Time Machine for Super Nintendo thinking it was a Mario game about traveling in time. Well, it kind of is, but it's very historically accurate and ridiculously educational. And there's a wheel with a square peg hole in the middle that's art. And I don't know what it's called, what it was, but as I thought this was a Mario game, didn't know anything in it was real. Leaning Tower of Pizza is in there. I said pizza as a joke. It's pizza, but
pizza, yeah.
Italy pizza. Anyway, bad joke. I learned about that. What I can actually remember and recall is learning about things such as ether, elixir from Final Fantasy games, and I didn't realize those were actual like what's the word apothecary terms back in the day, like ethers and elixirs and stuff that heal you and herbs and stuff.
Right, because you think it's just like Gil is some made up thing,
right?
For Final Fantasy, but no, it's an actual. Unlike Gil, they are actual things.
Yep. And Mithril, I heard about it in a video game. I know it's it's a fantasy thing, but in Lord of the Rings, Mithril is a thing. So most people in the world learned about Mithril through Lord of the Rings, if you read that growing up. And I learned about Mithril in Final Fantasy.
I could have sworn Mithril was an original creation of Tolkien's.
Is it really?
Yeah, actually, here's something I learned today. Did you know that the Tolkien estate, not Tolkien himself, but the Tolkien estate sued Gary Gygax, the creator of Dungeons and Dragons, over the usage of a bunch of different fantasy terms in Dungeons and Dragons. Among them were things like Ents and Hobbits, and there was one more. Oh, Balrog. And those they did have to change. There were 3 terms that had to change, and those were the 3 that they had to change. So Ents were turned into Treants, Hobbits were turned into Halflings, and Balrogs were turned into Baelor, which I didn't know that was a D&D thing. Anyways, but also among the list of things that the Tolkien estate were trying to get removed from Dungeons and Dragons were goblins, orcs, elves, dragons, and a bunch more of just generic fantasy terms that the courts were like, no, those are public domain enough that you cannot claim ownership over those things. But anyways, that was just funny. A side fact that you made me think of it with your Mithril. But cool. Well, then that's DLC. See, we've learned things over the years.
Yeah, we did through video games.
Yep, thanks to video games. Cool.
We want to know what you guys have learned from video games in your childhood. What things have educational games taught you, or not educational games? What things have you learned from video games? And you can do that by hitting up all of our social media outlets: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Reddit. We have a subreddit. It's all 80 BIT Podsmash, 80-bit Podsmash, all lowercase, no funny business. You can add us. You can even email us, 80bitpodsmash@gmail.com. You can also find us on Discord. There's a link to our server with every single show that gets posted. You can find our Twitch streams every single Wednesday evening between the hours of 7 and 9 Eastern Daylight Savings Time. We will be online streaming on twitch.tv/80bitpodsmash. And if you do want to find more platforms for you to listen to our show on, you can go to 80bitpodsmash.com. That's our landing website with links to Google Play, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Stitcher. Our RSS feed is there for any third-party apps. If we are not somewhere you are and you want us to be there, let us know, and we'll put ourselves there. So hit us up and let us know what you think. Give us feedback. Write us questions. Write us topic suggestions. And we will answer and respond on the show, just for you.
Awesome. Great. That's not the end of our show, so don't start turning the podcast off now.
Nope.
We have a whole topic left.
We do.
So our main topic tonight is educational games. So we're going to be talking about games and their educational merits, and talk about the history of games that were being designed specifically for that purpose. Maybe not so much history, but definitely, history will come up. So what are educational games, and what are some examples? The quote I pulled from... Yes, edutainment.
Is a word.
That's it. Yeah. That is a word. I pulled a quote from Wikipedia from their they have a whole Wikipedia article on just educational games. Educational games are games explicitly designed with educational purposes, or which have incidental or secondary educational value. So, again, the educational game Wikipedia entry is about games, period, not video games necessarily specifically, though those are included. But this could be any game, board games, or even just like, hey, we're gonna play patty cake, but each time our hands clap, we're going to shout SAT words and you're going to give me the definition. You know what I mean? Like, that's an educational game. In fact, that's actually a part of games education is, or educational, like, is people coming up with their own, like having the student and the teacher work together to come up with a game. That's actually something that is taught as a technique now in modern primary education. Anyways, wow. But this includes things that have secondary educational value, meaning one could argue that every game is an educational game because every game has some form of secondary educational value, whether that's teaching you like hand-eye coordination skills, that is something that has to be learned and practiced, teaching you rhythm, like rhythm games, or like Monopoly, accidentally teaching you about how to drive up the capitalist markets and bring people into poverty. That's actually a fact I learned. I listened to a podcast, Stuff You Should Know, on Monopoly, and the original designer of the game, she wanted to design a game to teach people how awful capitalism is and how it drives people into poverty. So the lesson is supposed to be the people who lose, who go bankrupt at the end of the game or whatever. That's supposed to be a lesson. But of course Hasbro took that and it's like, nah, they're losers. You're the winner if you still have money left at the end of the game. Capitalism, huzzah!
Yep, that's perfect. And go figure, Hasbro, a capitalist company, did that to make money.
I don't know if it's Hasbro or if it might be another one. I could be wrong.
Hasbro has it now. So. You're right.
Do they have it now?
Okay, originally, yeah.
But any game arguably could be an educational game. Obviously, though, there are games with the explicit intention designed from the ground up to be educational games. So some examples of games that are primarily explicitly educational are, take it away, Termite.
The Oregon Trail. Come on, everybody's played Oregon Trail, right?
Yeah.
That game came out in 1971. I didn't know it was that old. The Minnesota Educational Computing Consortium, MECC, was actually the publisher of it. And it was developed over the course of 2 weeks in a history unit in Minneapolis Junior High School. So definitely your talk of like teacher to software developer integration, that's how Oregon Trail kind of came out. It was deleted from the school district's mainframe computer at the end of the school semester. But then they recreated it again in 1974 for the MECC, which distributed educational software for free in Minnesota for sale elsewhere, and recalibrated the probabilities of events based on historical journals and diaries for the game's release the following year. So a lot of history was put in the game. It was a game. It was a strategy game, and you were tasked with going from Minnesota to Oregon. I don't know where you started. Independent City?
Isn't it St. Louis? St. Louis?
Is it?
Maybe.
Missouri. Yeah.
Because I thought that was the original Oregon Trail is where it started. Is like, because that's why the whole gateway, because it was the gateway to the West. Maybe. Yep. I could be wrong, but that would make sense to me as St. Louis.
We learned so much from this game.
Clearly. All anybody ever remembers about Oregon Trail is people dying of dysentery. That has become the Oregon Trail meme for the last 40 years. It's like, died of dysentery. But hey, listen, we all learned what dysentery was from Oregon Trail.
Yeah, we sure did.
Terrible, terrible disease and a terrible way to die. You know how dysentery kills you?
How?
You dehydrate because you're pooping so much. Everything that comes out of you is liquid, and you basically, it dries you up, it prunes you out. That's such an awful, terrible way to die. Really dehydration is not fun. It's not like you just sort of pass out. Oh, I'm so thirsty. Like, ew, it's not. Sorry, Oregon Trail. That's all anyone remembers about it. It's dysentery. Fording. Didn't you have to ford rivers, or you could choose to ford them or ferry, and there were advantages.
You could pay money and ferry. You could ford if there was civilization, you could pay someone to ferry you over, and you could ford it, which is just like walk through it.
But it's like a risk. You have a chance of your whole wagon collapsing, and then all of your people get the aforementioned dysentery or hypothermia or whatever.
My deep dive into that game.
Crazy.
My Termite history, like me as a kid, we played Oregon Trail 2, and we got like this crazy wooden box special edition. I'm looking right at it. I have it on my shelf. It came with a player's guide. Yeah. And this thing went super deep with like all of the individual supplies you could buy. I mean, you talk about Bethesda level crafting material deep dive. You go to the general store and you can buy all of the cheesecloth, gunpowder, all of the stuff you would need, milk, eggs, cheese, like it was all separate. And I remember like being completely overwhelmed with all the stuff you could do. And then whatever. I just like buy a bunch of crap and then ford the first river, and I would lose all of it. And it would be like, here's the laundry list of supplies you've lost.
That would
and
make a great April Fool's joke, by the way, is some big game company announcing that they're releasing a remake of Oregon Trail for the Xbox Series X or whatever. You know what I mean?
I would play the crap out of a Red Dead Redemption level
Oregon Trail,
Oregon Trail game. Oh my god,
a survival game where you have to historically accurate survival game. That would actually be fascinating. Make it happen.
I'd be all
Publishers
about it.
of Oregon Trail.
You heard it here first, folks.
Yep. No, moving on. So 1983, another really popular educational
Math Blaster.
game. Yeah.
You ever play Math Blaster?
It's like you say the words Math Blaster and my brain goes, yes, that is the thing I recognize and probably have played, but you are going to need to describe it to me for me to, in fact, I'm going to pull up a picture of it because I have
you should look up an image. I do believe it was a little spaceman that you could hover around and solve math equations. There's also like some first person cockpit, like shooting in a spaceship thing. Googling it now doesn't really do it justice because there's a whole bunch of modern takes on
I see it.
But
yeah,
there was the trash zapper, rocket launcher, number recycler. There was a whole bunch of different copies of mainstream games, but also there was things that would like you walk around on the on the ground of a strange planet and you like shoot up at the numbers at the top of the screen and you walk around at the bottom and
I vaguely remember this. Yeah. The guy looks familiar, the character with the green and the little red antennas. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep, he's the one. That's the mascot. I don't know what his name is.
Yeah, because like my parents never forced me to play educational games, but I remember going over to my friends, my neighbors who I would always go over to play games at their house, and I remember their parents tried to like force us to play educational games at one point. Because they're like, well, they're playing games. So I went over there and I was like, well, I can't play games at my parents' house, my house, so I might as well go over and play games. And then they're like, you're going to play educational games. I'm like, I can't say I've learned anything from, like, I didn't learn anything in, like, Math Blaster that I didn't already know, like, didn't already learn in school. I get it, math is, like, all about practice, but, like, there's no way that, like, Math Blaster increased my, like, math knowledge. But anyway, moving on. We
had a Termite experience with this too. We had a pre-algebra version of Math Blaster that involved this like these animations that were cartoony because it was later in like Windows 95, 96 timeframe. And so it had these like full motion videos that were cartoons with full motion, like voice acted and everything. And it was like the scary mansion and these puzzles you had to do. And it was my first introduction to algebra ever. It was for ages 9 and up, and I was not old enough. I don't know how old I was, but I just remember like completely confused. It was like 4n plus 5 equals 7. And I'm like,
what is n?
What is n? That's a number.
That's not a number. Yeah.
I couldn't beat the game. I was completely clueless, and we just kept trying things. My brother and I, we had a blast. But that was my real experience with Math Blaster, other than the like education or kindergarten, like elementary school at school. But
before we move on to the aughts, I really quickly want to ask, do you remember Mavis Beacon Teaches Typing?
Oh yeah, we had that.
And would you call that a game? Because I'm looking at Wikipedia on it right now, and they're just calling it an application software program. I'm like, but it was a game. Like, it scored you, and you had to get a certain score to move on. And it has
that was totally a game.
Okay, cool, great. Yeah, no, that was that. I mean,
I don't care what the world says. Termite calls that an educational video game.
Yeah, and like
I played the crap.
I actually learned that was something. I mean, don't get me wrong. I learned typing, like the keyboard layout. Again, if you go from being like kids these days are going to just have it instinctual, whatever. But like if you go from being a kid who learned that the alphabet is in a very specific order and that you're supposed to read things from left to right, the idea that the keyboard does not start with A and go to B, blah, 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 blah through Z is so confusing. So seeing the QWERTY keyboard for the first time being, of course, QWERTY, which is what a keyboard layout is, it was mind-boggling. Like I still can't tell you why it was designed that way. But I think it's designed based on like what like letters are the most common. Like they ran algorithms to determine what letters are the most common to be used, and they put them more central because that's how hands work. Anyways, the single fact I learned from Mavis Beacon Teaches Typing, beyond of course how to type effectively and quickly, is that the bumps on F and J are there for your index finger so that you can put your hands on the keyboard without having to look every time and orient. that is video game design, right? Like that is how controllers are designed. That's how the GameCube controller works so well, is like you don't have to look down to know that the big button is A, because it's big and it's tactile. Yeah. I thought that was a cool, like, hey, that's a fact I learned from a video game.
That is a game I had completely removed from my memory until you said it just now. That's amazing. And I looked at screenshots. I'm like, oh my gosh, I spent so many hours playing this game.
But just that woman's name, Mavis Beacon, in the mind of anyone who was born like 1985 and on, like you encountered Mavis Beacon at some point in school. It was actually designed, or it was released in 1987. So. Yeah, it would have been.
I had the sequel. It was like Mavis Beacon Teacher's Typing 2 for Windows 95.
Certainly, yeah. I don't know if I encountered the original one or not, but definitely a crazy old educational game. But
that's a good pull. That's fun. It's a good trip down memory lane.
Right. Cool. Moving on. Brain Age 2006. I'm not super familiar with this, so I'll let you take it.
That was the hit Nintendo DS game that was like viral. And I have quoted here. It came out in 2006. 2 years later, it was the 10th best-selling Nintendo DS game of December 2008. And why that's a big deal is because the Nintendo DS is it charts as one of the top selling consoles of all time. It's ridiculously popular. And DS games MSRP'd for $30 or $40, and it made $19 million worldwide in 2015, which was like 10 years almost. It was 9 years after it had come out. So crazy popular. It was all about the science behind keeping your brain stimulated in different ways with different puzzles. And so it's kind of it's not teaching you history or art or math. Well, it does math. There's definitely math. Sudoku was kind of viral at that time. If you remember, there was a time where Sudoku was everywhere. That was kind of the team that they helped in that. Like they were a part of that wave with Sudoku in the game. All these different like brain puzzles to challenge your brain in different ways. And I put it on here as an educational game because ridiculous amounts of kids had Nintendo DSs. They still do. And that game was on all of them. So that was Brain Age. A little non-traditional because like Math Blaster is I'm going to teach you math. Oregon Trail is a history game.
Well, they got more and more like games that could easily be defined as educational games. We're getting more and more sophisticated at like teaching people through subterfuge and being like, here's an engaging and fun game, but we're gonna like actually teach you things in it,
right?
And that's why I like that you pulled and slotted Minecraft in there because it's this big open sandbox world where you can like build stuff and do stuff, but it's got educational features in it as well.
There's basic stuff about like structural integrity and different materials and where the materials come from and survival with hunger.
Right, it's like talk to any architect who was born in the 80s or 90s, and I guarantee you they will say, "Hey, I actually was inspired to become an architect because I played with Legos." Minecraft is that for kids in the aughts. like I actually learned that I had a fascination with building structures through Minecraft. Like Minecraft has replaced Legos in that regard.
Yeah. You play Minecraft?
I've played very briefly, but it never really hooked me. It never really got me.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah. Yep. But cool. But it's huge. It's undeniably huge. But
it's ridiculous. Yeah, it's one of the top grossing games of all time. Well, I don't know the exact numbers, but we're going to continue to move on. So I looked up just for fun. I Googled like what are educational games today that are popular? And of course, because of coronavirus and quarantines, I looked up modern educational games, and like 90% of them are now relegated to smartphones and tablets.
Makes sense.
But they're also like more modern renditions of some of the classics, like Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego? Remember that game?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That was kind of fun. So a whole bunch of like free to play or non like smartphone stuff to teach math and things, and there were a bunch of stuff I'd never heard of. But some of the more modern actual console video games that came up on that list as well, I wanted to highlight things like Little Big Planet. It's a PlayStation exclusive franchise. There's various ones on PlayStation 3 and PlayStation 4. Little Big Planet 3 was, I think, the latest one. It's actually developed by Media Molecule, who just came out with Dreams. So if you're on PS4, Dreams just came out. It's like $25 or $30. But it teaches logic, spatial orientation skills, design, and problem solving. There's actually like game design teaching is happening in Little Big Planet.
Yeah.
And then there's Portal, which everyone knows. If you're listening to us, you should know what Portal is.
The cake is a lie.
If you're not, it was a game published by Valve. It was huge in the gaming industry. It's a cultural phenomenon. Everyone makes references to it, and it's massive, but it also teaches logic, problem solving, physics, math, science, and spatial skills, because you could shoot. It had a gun, and you could switch from orange to blue, and that would create a portal. You walk through blue, you come out of orange, or vice versa, and so it had all these puzzles. And then another example is the Kerbal Space Program, which I've just came out for PS4, or was announced to come out soon on PS4, but it was mostly a PC game that also teaches things like physics, things about the solar system, mathematics, and basic aerospace engineering is involved as
awesome.
well.
Yeah, that's crazy. I've heard of Kerbal Space Program, but I didn't realize it like basically taught you math and aerospace engineering. I'm going to say a bold statement that may be refutable, but I'm going to make the argument anyways. I think that any game that has puzzles or any puzzle game is educational, because puzzles, if you can say that Portal teaches problem solving and physics, like that's what every puzzle game teaches. Well, maybe not physics so much, but problem solving for sure. And one could argue that in many ways every game is a puzzle game, because every game has problems and forces you to solve them. In Borderlands, those problems are, hey, those enemies have blue shields, so I need a weapon that does X amount of damage to X amount of lightning damage to get those shields down as quickly as possible. Like, you're basically doing very basic, puzzles in your head. But anyways, that's just
you're making a good point though, because it's not even too much of a tangent. When you talk about games being an educational game, it's one thing to say this is an education product or edutainment product. It's another thing to say, is this video game educational? And it's like saying, here is a game that is art. Are all video games art? Well, this game's definitely art, talking about Journey or Flower or Flow, like this is an art game. Well, okay, maybe, but are all video games art? Yes. And so the analogy continues with our discussion here about educational video games.
Right.
Like, yes.
You can learn something, and a video game can teach you skills, and you could definitely make an argument. Like if you could throw a video game out at me, and I could make an argument probably that it's teaching you some skill, and therefore it is a form of education. But anyways,
it's a great segue. How can games be powerful educational tools?
I was gonna say, let's break down what the nitty gritty of like what do games provide that make them such strong educational tools.
I found some notes on Forbes.com through an article, How Video Games Help Students Level Up STEM Learning. And this article is exactly what we just talked about. It's not looking at games that are marked as edutainment, because those are obvious. But this is gaming in general. How do the community and the industry of video games help students level up in STEM? And I'm going to read from a small portion I had posted, but just 4 categories. And this is how games can be powerful educational tools. And this affects both the edutainment side of games, but also all video games. And here are the 4 points. They put the player in control. Players get to move around imaginary worlds however they like and be in charge of their own experiences. You can compare this to sitting at a desk, listening to a lecture, and it's easy to see why kids love games. The second point, they offer incremental levels of difficulty. Quote, leveling up by accomplishing tasks provides a rewarding sense of accomplishment. It also keeps the player from getting bored by something too easy or frustrated by something too difficult. And I'm going to add myself to that, my own personal experience with school. In high school specifically, I found the level of difficulty of what the teachers were teaching was easy, and I found myself bored. And because you put a boy in school that's bored, you're going to end up in trouble. Yeah. And the one time I ever got detention was because I was talking when I shouldn't have, because I was bored and wasn't doing what the class was doing. So I can totally understand.
Yeah. And it works on the other end too. If it's too hard, your brain just shuts down and you're like, well, I'm not going to get this, so I'm going to act up. You know what I mean? Like, so like it's a constant struggle for education to like find the right difficulty, because that's going to be different for every single kid in that classroom. Games can give you that flexibility of, hey, I've got it. Cool. I'm going to move on to the next tier of difficulty.
Yep. Or you can go backwards.
Yep, exactly. Too hard. I'm going to bump it back down.
Yep. Point 3 of my 4, they provide instant ongoing feedback. Players can tell right away when they've made a mistake, and they have the opportunity to start over if they fail. Many games also have prominent timers and or health bars that show how players are faring and help them make adjustments to their strategies. So instead of like going through a whole entire study and taking a test at the end and submit it to the teacher and you wait a week and you get a grade back. But in that week, you've had 3 other tests from 3 other teachers on 3 different subjects, and they're also a week late in your feedback. You have instant feedback. You know exactly what's happening right now, and you can change your strategy or your approach. If there's a pitfall you're struggling with, you can immediately make that adjustment yourself, and you can take agency over it.
Yeah.
Point 4, they create community. And this is probably the single most important aspect of video games, period. And
arguable.
It sounds... It's arguably. It sounds.
That sounded like I was saying that's debatable. No, I actually meant like that is arguably the most important one, and I do think there is a fair argument to be made that is the most important. Carry on. It's
not just because we're in a quarantine situation where our communities are shattered and we're stuck at home.
Please play games with me.
But many games allow for multiplayer participation, and even solo players can chat with others about their experiences to compare notes and solve problems collaboratively. There is a monumental amount of value in video games that bring players together. Working together as a team is invaluable in the professional workforce. You will always be with coworkers. You will always be forced to play with different players, or quote unquote play with different players, work with different people, different personality types, working together for a common goal, or even competing against one another, how to be a good sport. Everything about how to be a person in society can be, not everything. The principles can be touched on in a video game, online with other people.
Right, but even like learning from each other, like even, it's not just like, teaching social skills, which is kind of the through line that I got from your arguments there. But even the idea that like, no, we just learn better in groups. We evolved that way. Our entire foundation of intelligence is based on language. The fact that we were able to have ideas and then share them to one another, like the fact that when we developed language is when intelligence started skyrocketing in humans, because now I'm able to say, hey, I have this idea, I'm going to share it with Termite, and Termite's like, that's a cool idea, let me elaborate upon it and share that and now I have the tools to share that back to you, and then soon we're creating intelligence together, basically. And then you multiply that on a massive scale, and then you add written language to that, the fact that we can now, not only can we pass ideas to each other, we can pass ideas to our grandkids, great grandkids, and their great grandkids forever. We have ideas passed to us from our great grandparents, and so now intelligence moves through time. Sorry, huge rant. I'm super nerdy about this stuff. Like the foundation of intelligence is cooperation and sharing of ideas, and that's what is made humans the dominant species on the planet. So yes, creating community and sharing ideas through video games is actually incredibly important for education, incredibly valuable, I should say, for education.
I'm going to read this little blurb, a paragraph from nyu.edu. 2013 in November, there was an article posted headlined, "Educational Video Games Can Boost Motivation to Learn." So it's not just the collaboration, social skills, but it also makes people more motivated to learn and chase after more knowledge. And here's what it says. Their findings, which appear in the Journal of Educational Psychology, point to new ways in which computer, console, or mobile educational games may yield learning benefits. Quote, "We found support for claims that well-designed games can motivate students to learn less popular subjects, such as math, and that game-based learning can actually get students interested in the subject matter. It can broaden their focus beyond just collecting stars or points," says Jan Plass, a professor at NYU's Steinhardt School of Culture, Education, and Human Development, and one of the study's lead authors. Continuing that, quote, "Educational games may be able to help circumvent major problems plaguing classrooms by placing students in a frame of mind that is conducive to learning rather than worrying about how smart they look," as adds co-lead author Paul O'Keefe, an NYU postdoctoral fellow at the time of the study and now at Stanford University's Department of Psychology. The research focused on how students' motivation to learn, as well as their interest and performance in math, was affected by playing a math video game, either individually, competitively, or collaboratively. So I thought that was, and this article goes on, I mean, it talks way more in detail about the unpacking that, but just the idea that you take a kid who's in a classroom and that whole social setting, some kids are scared to ask a question because they might appear too dumb. Or some kids might not ask a question because they don't want to appear arrogant. Like they're asking a question that's higher than the class level. I've been in both situations. That's why I use both of those as examples. Mm-hmm. But this idea that you can play a video game that gets you more interested in topics. You can work together with friends. It flattens the who's smart, who's not. You work together as groups, and it drives more interest in learning. And that's awesome.
That's a huge point, because I can only just speak from experience. Like, I mean, literally, I had mentioned earlier that I learned the word innervate, learned the general context of the word innervate from World of Warcraft, and thought that was a cool ability, thought that was a cool idea, and more importantly, thought that was a cool word. I literally went looked up the actual formal definition of the word innervate, so I would have a better understanding of it, so that I could come to this podcast and know what I was talking about. I learned something, though. I sought learning because I was interested and fascinated in a topic, and I had been fascinated in it for the last the last 14, 15 years because of a freaking game. How many people were inspired to like become history majors because they played Assassin's Creed when they were kids and they loved it? You know, they loved that time period. They're like, wow, I'm fascinated by this time period. I want to learn more about it. Like, that is something that actually, that is, I can only speak anecdotally, but I imagine that's something that happens on a huge, large scale. I love Call of Duty. I want to go learn about weapon history, or I want to learn about World War II history, or I want to go into the military to learn how to do these skills. You know what I mean? Like, it has inspired, games have this incredible, ability to activate the imagination and therefore inspire learning because your imagination is engaged. And that's something from some of the research I was reading. They say that, games often, this is from the Wikipedia article, but they have a citation here from a scientific research article. But it says games often have fantasy element that engage the players in a learning activity through narrative or storylines. Educational video games can motivate children and allow them to develop an awareness of consequentiality. So the idea that like, oh, I learned that there are like consequences, but again, not all consequences are bad. Some consequences are like, oh, that's a cool benefit that has happened as a result of this. I want to learn more about it. It engages that imagination, which I think is cool. Another thing I read is that games provide structure to problem solving, allowing players to fail up, which I love that idea, failing up, meaning that with a combination of challenging and fun and identity building, the student will continue to persist on that problem until it is solved. I mean, even non-educational games, entertainment games, the fact that you have to like fail over and over and over again to learn what you need, the combination of things you need to do to beat it. I mean, the immediate example that comes to mind is you are a much better at the Final Fantasy VII Remake's combat system than you were when you started, because you had to fail over and over again. And the failure doesn't always mean your character dies, game over. A failure can just mean I got hit by that so many times I had to use a potion, and I don't want to use all my potions, so I'm going to learn how to dodge or block or whatever better, so that so when you start adding up all those failures and into, like, okay, great, now I know how to solve this problem, you suddenly have all these skills that you didn't have before. And that's what failing up means, is you make enough mistakes that you get better and you advance through your failure. And that's something that you can't always simulate in a classroom. You can't always, even the extreme example of tests, you can't fail up in testing. Testing's, by its definition, is if you fail, you do not advance. If you succeed, you advance, and you only succeed through advancement. Games allow the opportunity to learn through failure, which is something that we don't really get in the educational system right now.
Which is a segue to the last question, but we're not there yet because we have a question in between. I completely agree with all of that. It's awesome. The Final Fantasy VII Remake stuff, my gosh. I turned it to easy mode in the middle of my original playthrough because I was so frustrated with the combat system, and I was trophy hunting, and I was forced to do a bunch of stuff I didn't want to do anyway. And so I just threw my hands up and said, I'm done. I want to experience the story. I want to know what this game is. So I put it on easy, and then I ratcheted it up to hard mode for the last trophy and played through the entire game in hard, where I did nothing but study the combat system because everything else was removed. I didn't care about the story. I didn't care about any other trophies. I didn't care about anything. I just wanted to beat these bosses, and it was the most complex chess game. That was the most infuriating love-hate relationship with a game I've ever experienced in modern times, and I'm done. But yeah, so that happened.
Which
so
is like, I had the same experience, but on a much, much less intense scale. Partially because I forced myself to play through the game on normal mode. Even when I was having trouble, I was like, I'm just going to learn it. I'm going to get better at it. So my segue into hard mode was a lot smoother. But even like when we were both at the same point in times in the, like we both done hard mode up to chapter 17. you were sitting there describing to me the trouble you were having with those bosses, and I'm like, yeah, beat them all in one shot. I followed the strategy and beat them all in one shot.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, sorry. Moving on. Well, cool. Then let's move on to our next segment, because again, we're sitting here preaching and raving about all the wonderful things about video games as educational tools, but there are limitations. There are problems to games as educational tools, obviously, or else they would have replaced school at this point, right?
Yep.
So what are those limitations?
Operating in a real world environment with real world consequences to your life, family, finances is something you will never be able to reproduce in a video game, because video games are sandboxes. They are virtual, and they aren't, real. They're fake. But like going on an archaeological dig in real life is astronomically different than playing Minecraft. All of the safety concerns, all of the nuance, all of the red tape, dealing with governments, dealing with the landowner. And that's just one example. In aerospace engineering or architectural engineering, all of those things involve real life buildings, real life materials. Those materials are finite. They cost money. Learning about math you can only go so far. When you start to go down the abstract path, I would call like more advanced college, maybe grad school level, PhD level learning, writing and doing research, creating new stuff that's completely groundbreaking. Like if you're playing a video game that allows you to create tools or create things, you are creating something new in a digital space, but you're still bound by the tools of that video game engine. If you're playing Dreams, you're still bound by the limitations of Dreams. If you're playing Minecraft, you're bound by the limitations of Minecraft. But in the real world, you creating something entirely new is an entire problem that you can't experience unless you do it in real life. And yes, educational games are good for bringing kids through grade school and through high school and supplementing college and social skills and things. But there's a lot of limitations when it comes to removing yourself from a real life physical world with real life consequences.
Yeah. I mean, in addition to that, there's also we already are very heavily reliant on technology. Kids are getting exposed, compared to us growing up, like kids are getting way overexposed to technology. I mean, it was one thing when it was like, there's the TV time and then you have game time and then your parents are like, now get your butts out of the house and go play. You know what I mean? And it was way easier to structure for our parents growing up. Now it's like phones are in pockets. You know what I mean? Like our kids are going to grow up watching us like just flippantly pull out our phone to check something. And that's exposure to technology that our parents didn't have. So we weren't even aware of it. So just the overuse of technology is something that's already talked about. And though, again, games are a great way to build community, they can also be a way to escape from community and hide from community and like not need to hone those basic communication in person. It is way different talking to someone with facial expressions and tone of voice and things like that. And that kind of stuff can get lost when your only communication is typing or at best maybe a voice chat, but you're still losing a lot of nonverbal communication and cues that way with games. Their other limitations are they don't leave enough. Oftentimes they don't leave a lot of room for spontaneous play, especially those sort of educational games, the ones that are designed explicitly for educational purposes. They don't allow you to like play and explore. They just like they kind of force you to kind of like learn. Like, I think Math Blaster, it's like you have to solve. You can't just experiment solving the equation. You can fail or succeed, and it's like there's only one path to success.
Yeah.
And Oregon Trail, there's only one, they want you to make certain decisions. They're trying to guide you into a specific way as opposed to just let you figure it out. Now, granted, there are games that do allow that flexibility, but oftentimes, again, they're not explicitly edutainment games, educational games. But that's still a limitation and even in those sort of open world explore games, there's almost always the most efficient way to do things. And again, we just talked about like looking up guides almost all the time. You can just look it up and then you don't learn something. You're just following a guide. What's the most efficient way to get materials in Minecraft? Okay, I'm going to go do that. What's the most efficient way to beat these bosses in Final Fantasy? Okay, I'm going to go do that. You know what I mean?
Yep, so that's what I did.
Yeah, exactly. So there is sort of a narrow scope there. And then, I mean, just speaking from experience, there's the idea that like, if I'm not interested in the game, I'm not going to be, it's not going to have those benefits of sparking my imagination. I still have taste as a human being. And if I don't like a game, I'm not going to want to learn. I'm not going to learn anything from it because I'm not going to want to engage mentally with it. If I'm being forced to play it, I'm going to be like, okay, I'm just going to grit my teeth and get this done. You know what I mean? If I'm So I'm only going to learn something if I'm actually interested in it. And so that's a whole category of people who aren't even interested in games in the first place. So they're not going to learn anything from any game because they don't care about games. So they need a very different learning, like they need a very different learning style based on that. And then of course, again, while I'm on that topic, there's just the whole fact that like games themselves can just be a distraction to learning. So, you know, there's a particular personality, I think, that will learn through games, or a specific kind of game and a given individual might spark and desire to learn that particular topic. But you're not going to be able to throw you're not going to be able to throw any given game at any given person and say you are guaranteed to learn something through this. So there is definitely like a balance and an unreliability of like, it's not a solution for everybody, and any given game is not a solution for everybody, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. It makes perfect sense.
So, cool. Well, that gives us our last question. We can spend a little bit of time here. How can the industry move towards increasing the educational value of games, and how should the culture evolve to facilitate more games education?
There are there's a lot of backlash with adding video games into schools based on what we just talked about, all those limitations, as well as older teachers that haven't adopted video games entirely are old school, quote unquote. And there's a myriad of different ways to teach in all these studies. So how can the industry move towards increasing the value of education in games? I think it is teaching teachers how valuable games can be as educational tools. And like that, we've made strides, with the smartphones and the tablets. There are organizations that have done studies, as we've just quoted in mass tonight on this show. Like there is lots of psychology happening. Lots of colleges are doing a lot of research, and that's happening. It is moving forward. It is, and it's a cycle, right? So you teach teachers how educational tools can be beneficial. They start using them, and then there's feedback back to how can we make this tool better? How do my kids in my class use this tool, this video game, to learn? And what else could you come up with to make this happen? Because there's this pitfall. So then it feeds back into the industry of creating educational games with these things and this feedback in mind. And it's kind of like an echo chamber. It goes back and forth and back and forth, and it's getting louder and better, and the quality is increasing. The educational value goes up, and it's happening. So I don't think there's like a charge to how can the industry fix this. It's happening. I mean, it is. Just go look.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, for sure. And I think that we talk a lot about this podcast about like games can be literature. You can, and obviously literature is seen as an incredible learning tool. The fact that we study the works of Shakespeare, we study 1984, George Orwell, we study these things because we believe that there is a value in that. So the more we get at creating good culture in games, you'll see things like people, it's important that games just begin to be infused with knowledge. And again, that way, the more that people in general, not just kids, but people are exposed to games, then that way you'll have teachers that are going to be able to identify in their students and be like, you know what? Why don't you pick up this game on your free time? Because I have noticed that you have a particular affinity towards, let's say, you're fascinated by psychology. You should check out Senua's Sacrifice, because it is a game that actually explores mental illness and has something to teach you about what that looks like from someone's perspective. And therefore then they'll be inspired, and then, the story will have things to teach them. So I think that it's just like, again, infusing just more knowledge and expertise into games will go a long way towards legitimizing them, not only as a medium, but as a medium for learning and a medium for study. There's also just the idea that play is such an important part of learning. My wife, who studies speech therapy, and she is an educator. She teaches speech, basically. She teaches, how to communicate with. I mean, the bottom line of her job is to just help people communicate with one another. In her case, she's helping kids communicate with one another. Mm-hmm. And she learned a fact about education that is basically like, it takes like 400 repetitions of a thing to form a synapse. Again, that's not just like short-term memory. Like I could memorize a bunch of facts in a night and then spit them out on a test the next morning. But this is about like forming a synapse of like, this is a part of my brain. This is something that my brain's going to fire off, when I immediately encounter this. It takes 400 repetitions of something in less it happens during play. If you are playing, it only takes 10 repetitions. That's nuts. So basically the idea is just to support the idea that like we learn really well when we are in a state of mind that is playing. It's just something we have always done as humans. We evolved that way. We evolved that way to learn skills through low stakes practice, basically. And that's what essentially what play is. So again, just creating more spaces for play that teach skills and teach ideas and expose people to ideas, but giving them the space to goof around in them. We're already moving in that direction. I mean, you look at Breath of the Wild. It is a Zelda game that is entirely an engine in which you can play with ideas, with physics and puzzles. Exactly. So you can go right after Ganon, or you can sit there and like figure out how to send rocks flying across the map and do fun things with that. Like it's an engine for play, and it's an opportunity for people to learn. So I think doing those two, if you can combine those two things, infusing games with more expertise and more knowledge, and then giving players a chance to play and experiment, it can be two separate things or it can be a single thing. But like having those two things in more and more games, I think will go a long way to legitimizing them as educational tools.
Yep.
So cool. Then I think that is all that we have, unless you had any closing thoughts.
To your last kind of sub-question, how should the culture evolve to facilitate more games? It is evolving, and I think the destigmatization of like mental illness and learning disorders and autism, other mental challenges, I think is monumental, because now those things can be talked about, those things can be researched. There's a spectrum of behavior patterns that indicate your child might have some aspects of these different types of mental issues and accessibility needs. And video game education, I mean, Microsoft is huge with their controller, the adaptive controller that allows people to make custom inputs and feed them into an Xbox controller to play games however they want, with physical disabilities or mental disabilities, visual disabilities. And I think our culture is evolving to facilitate all of that. And I just wanted to talk about that for a second. So I think all of that is huge. It's happening. I love that there are colorblind modes in almost every menu of the game. Difficulty settings. We had a discussion in the past about reducing a game to easy doesn't necessarily mean you're a bad gamer. Some people can't. Like,
right, or that you're compromising your vision. Like some players physically could only experience the game on an easy mode because of limitations. So it's not you're not compromising your vision. There's a little bit of a controversy
with Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice, because of it's hard, and someone was like, "Well, it's the artist's image for that game is for it to be ridiculously hard. So to cheapen that by lowering the difficulty would ruin the artistic direction." And there was a whole controversy about all of that, and I love that there was. I love that conversation happened and it's moving it forward.
A great conversation to have.
Yeah,
but
that's for not us right now.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, the culture is evolving because it's constantly changing because of different people coming in and out of the culture through life and death. Got a little dark, but I mean, in some cases, a lot of this stuff is going to become more and more widely accepted as the older guard of education or educators drop out, as they retire, as they die. We'll see more and more people who grew up with games, who grew up with educational games, who grew up with this stuff, entering into not only designing these things, but also being the educators to adopt them and say, hey, these actually are good because I learned this way, So, so sometimes it just has to happen with the natural flow of time of the in and out. Old ideas get replaced by new ideas because of the new people that come in and grow up into that thing. So, cool. All right, I think that's where we got to stop. So, if you have thoughts, what are educational games that you've encountered? What are games that have inspired you? Do you just think games are only entertainment and only have entertainment value and should never be considered as educational tools because that presents a whole bunch of dangers? We still want to hear those thoughts. We want to hear those ideas. We want to have those discussions and those conversations. So Termite, where can the good pod smashers of the internet find us if they want to share their thoughts?
The Cliff Notes version, 80bitpodsmash.com. It's our landing website for our podcast platform. We have links to everything you would want to see. We are also on all the major social media platforms. You can add us 80bitpodsmash at 80bitpodsmash. And we have a subreddit. You can engage us there. There's a link to our Discord in every single one of our show notes. And we're also live every Wednesday on twitch.tv/80bitpodsmash playing something. You can come interrupt and ask your own questions there.
Fantastic. We have a episode next week that will air on May 25th. Termite once again failed me and did not add to the list, so I then got to exercise my right to choose. And so I selected game engines. We will be discussing video game engines, which are the tools that are used to make games. It is a development tool, so it should be a much more industry-oriented podcast where we'll be talking about basically software tools. Basically, what are the Photoshops of video games? The tools, software tools that are used to actually make games from the ground up. So that's what we'll be talking about next week.
Photoshop is one of them.
Oh, really? I believe that. So, all right, there's a tease for you. We'll talk about Photoshop.
All right, everybody.
See you next week.
See you next week.